submit something, if you would. Thank you. Senator Fischer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zackheim, what do you see as being the primary lessons learned from the war in Ukraine thus far?
The number one lesson is that we should stand and will advance our interest by standing with Ukraine. That aggression needs to be countered, and if we do so, that is not going to be escalatory, but in fact stabilizing. And I think the best thing we can do for our national security interests is to see Russia defeated in Ukraine. And this committee and this Congress has done a lot to support Ukraine in realizing that. I think we have to stop measuring our support for Ukraine by the particular weapons platform that's on the table and think more broadly and strategically. What is our aim? What is our goal? The goal is to roll back Russia, to support Ukraine in their counteroffensive, and we should be supporting them with the necessary munitions and platforms to realize that objective. That will return security and stability to Europe and deter Vladimir Putin. He has never been deterred because he has never had to deal with a counter to his aggression. We've talked about 2014 in Crimea. As the Senator knows, started in 2008 with Georgia. This is the first time we've had the counter, and we need to pull it and support it through to the end.
One thing that I have been focused on from the very beginning is our munitions capacity and the production that we see. When you say, I thought you kind of glossed over that on your answer, and I think there is a real and urgent need to expand munition production capacity as quickly as possible, not just to address the ongoing war that we see in Ukraine. What additional steps do you think you would recommend to Congress to consider to overcome our current limitations that we have on that capacity?
Well, Senator, I agree with you, and I did not mean to gloss it over. In fact, I share your view that this is an urgent problem. It's an urgent problem in Ukraine. It's an urgent problem in Taiwan. And many of those munitions and capabilities, we not only need in those two theaters, but we also need here at home. And as you're fully aware, we don't have that capacity, both in terms of what we need for current scenario planning and also for surge capacity. I think this committee started it in this past year's National Defense Authorization Bill, but it's limited. The most important thing this Congress can do, and I know I'm preaching to the converted here on the authorizing committee, but multi-year procurement. I think you solve a lot of this if you're able to buy things over the course of 3-4 years. You make it cheaper. You know, that's an efficiency that I know Senator Wicker's focused on, other members of this committee. But it's scale. It's scale and industrial capacity. This is capital-intensive investments, not just to get the particular munition that can be produced on the current production line, but it's multiple production lines. And Senator, as you know, it's not just about munitions. The most important capability for a Taiwan scenario, and I assume Dr. Lin would agree, is our undersea capability. And we are retiring our undersea capability at a faster rate than we're producing them. That, in its essence, is a capital problem around industrial capacity, Senator.
I agree with you, and that was the reason that I was able to get the amendment in the NDAA to address that problem specifically. On this committee, and this is for all of our panelists, on this committee we've been debating and changing security dynamics, in particular the return of great power competition. And what do you see as being implications that we have for our military in that regard, and how do you think the events that we've seen play out over the past year may have changed your view of that discussion? Dr. Lin, would you like to start?
Thank you. So in terms of great power competition and looking at the China dynamic, I think if I could add really quickly to what China is learning from Ukraine, I think what China is seeing is how long a war can occur, and related to the Taiwan scenario, and what the United States needs to do is we need to make sure that we are not expending all of our munitions and assets within a very short period of time. Recently, CSIS did extensive wargaming, and we found given our current stocks, they would run out within 2 weeks. And if we are expecting a Taiwan conflict to last more than that, we definitely need to build up our defense industrial base, as well as both the surge capacity as well as the capacity to be able to have more of these stocks pre-positioned in the region. In terms of great power competition, what I'm seeing from China's end, particularly after Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan last August, is a greater willingness on China's end to use limited demonstration of military force to express its displeasure. What is taking away from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and why it thinks Russia needed to invade Ukraine, was that it saw that Russian efforts at diplomacy with our NATO allies and with the United States failed. And if you don't believe that diplomacy can allow you to achieve your aims, then you have to think about a greater use of military force, including demonstrations of force at smaller scale.
Thank you. Dr. Hill.
Thank you so much, Senator Fischer. I concur with my colleagues here on the panel, and actually I want to pick up on something that Mr. Zackheim absolutely was right in emphasizing, that in fact all of this started in 2008 with Russia's move into Georgia. In fact, we've had 15 years of this phase of great power competition, if that's how we want to call it, that we should have been paying closer attention to. We thought that was an aberration. It turned out not to be. And what we have to recognize here is obviously, we're in a very different competition, if that's what we want to call it, from Russia and China. Russia has been in the process of revanchism, revisionism, trying to overturn a territorial order in Europe. And of course, China is similarly engaged with Taiwan, is obviously of a different nature, but also territorial claims against many of its neighbors, Japan, Vietnam, and others in the South China Seas. The United States is not in that position of territorial acquisition. And again, I think part of the message that we have to get across all the time, notwithstanding all the accusations that we have from previous US actions in at different times in our history, is that we are actually trying to maintain the current international order, which means the territorial integrity of all of the recognized states, and that is different. And that should enable us to build a coalition of other countries, including middle powers, to push back against the actions of China and Russia, and specifically of Russia at this juncture, but China over the future. So I think we also have to focus on how, when we're answering these questions, we're going to work with our allies in all of these different alignments that we've already talked about, in NATO, with AUKUS, expanding that out, and also trying to push, as I mentioned before, countries like South Africa away from contemplating the kind of activities that they're now engaging in.
Thank you, sir.